Anyway, my name is Rocky Snyder. For those that aren't familiar with me, if you're new to the meetup of movement-based education, thanks for coming in and welcome. It's great to have you here. Hopefully there's some things that you can walk away with. But today's topic is reshaping flat feet. And it just so happens I have my left foot in hand here. This is a skeleton of a foot. And I guess we should maybe talk about the anatomy of the foot first before anything else. So your left foot has 26 bones, and where those bones come together creates a joint. And so when we add those up, it comes to 33. 33 joints, 26 bones, and they're all meant to move in a certain way, and they all have a certain shape, and they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. In one moment, those pieces of the puzzle are meant to lock together and become this rigid thing in which we can push off of planet Earth. But in another moment, in a fraction of a second, those bones are meant to spread apart so that we can absorb impact when we land on planet Earth. And those, for the most part, are our two options. We can either be leaving planet Earth or landing on it. And you might hear the words pronation and supination. And pronation is the act of landing and absorbing impact. And supination is the act of creating a rigid lever and pressing off the ground. Now, the interesting thing is that they're kind of polar opposites, right? One is landing, one is pushing off. And the most interesting thing is every joint in the body must have a certain role to play when we land on the ground. Not just the foot, but the ankle must flex, the knee must flex, the hip must flex to allow the muscle tissue to absorb the impact of all of our weight hitting planet Earth with its mass and momentum. And then as we push off, the opposite joint actions must occur. Not only must the foot begin to supinate, which we'll get into for sure, but the ankle needs to what we call plantar flex, or begin in the opposite direction of this and begin pushing off. The knee, instead of flexing, must extend. The hip, instead of flexing, must extend. And all of these things must occur for efficient movement every single time. However, for most of us, that isn't necessarily always going to happen. We have had ourselves a little injury or a surgery, or we don't move as much, or we move too much. Any of those things are going to maybe affect the way in which our body moves, and therefore affect how our foot is positioned when we're standing and when we're moving. So we're talking about a flat foot. And what is a flat foot? Well, you get a lot of different definitions, but it's basically when these arches in the feet are not in the right shape. They're not in the same shape they should be in when standing in a supporting position. I said these arches, and what I'm referring to is actually we've got 3 arches. We have 3 arches in our feet. The one that we're familiar with, the medial arch, I'm going to shut off that little beep for right now. There we go. The medial arch is that big toe here. This is my left foot. So the arch that's created on the inside portion of your foot. Now there's 2 points on the underside of your foot that need to stay in contact. We've got the first metatarsal head. That means your big toe, the first ray. This bone that comes down the roof of your foot and connects to your big toe, this is the first metatarsal. And at the end, that's the first metatarsal head. Now that stays on the ground and it stays in contact as well as with the calcaneus, or your heel. This creates the inside arch that everyone thinks of when we think of arches, whether they're fallen or they're high or they're rigid or whatever. However, we've got another arch on the outside of our foot. You'll see there is a slight arch. It's not as pronounced, but it's an arch nonetheless. And it is in contact here at the heel, that calcaneus, and the fifth ray, the pinky toe, that bone that comes down and connects to the pinky toe is called your fifth metatarsal. So we've got the fifth metatarsal head and the heel that create the lateral arch. But wait, there's more. We've got a third arch that makes up our foot, and that comes over the roof of the foot. And those two bony parts that help to support that arch are the first metatarsal head and the fifth metatarsal head. So when those 2 points stay in contact, we've got a nice transverse arch. When these 2 points stay in contact, we've got a nice medial arch. And then when the outside portion, the fifth met and the heel, stay in contact, we've got a nice lateral arch. Now these arches behave in the same way at the same time. When one arch begins dropping down, the other arches begin dropping down. It is just the spreading of those bones, almost kind of like an octopus is what I think of. It's just splaying out. And all the muscle tissue that connects underneath the surface of your foot, your plantar tissue, plantar fascia. If anyone's ever heard of plantar fasciitis or have complained and experienced it themselves, well, then you know what we're talking about. This tissue, when the arches drop down, the underside of the foot begins lengthening. And the opposite will occur when the arches reform and we begin pushing off the ground. Those muscles will start to shorten. And it's similar to a trampoline where we drop down and everything spreads out. That is like a kid dropping down on the trampoline. All the springs start to lengthen and absorb the impact. And then in a moment's notice, it reverses and sends the child flying up through the air. That's what we're going to be looking at today, is the quality of your foot and how it moves. Now, the interesting thing here is that it's not just the foot that is deciding its shape, but it could have a lot to do with what the body above is doing or where the body is positioned. So let's get out of our chairs just temporarily and let's feel what happens to your feet when the body above begins to move in different places. So I'm just going to have you, if you don't mind, stand on up and kick off your socks and shoes. And you're just going to be standing with your feet comfortably underneath you. And before we really get going to understand how the foot moves, it's probably a really great idea to understand where those pressures of your body are as they relate to your feet. Now remember, at the beginning, I was talking about these points of contact at the base of your foot that create the arches. It's the ball of the foot by the big toe, the ball of the foot by the little toe, and the center of the heel pad. That makes up this triangle or tripod under each foot. What I want you to do before we begin moving the body is, can you home in on how you feel your body descending down in regards to its weight on your feet? For instance, if you had 2 bathroom scales and you had 1 foot on top of each scale, would those numbers be identical? Or would one scale read higher than the other? Do you feel as if there is a subtle difference between the left and right foot? For some of us, maybe not so subtle. Take your attention to your right foot. Where is the pressure? Is it under all 3 points? Or do you feel like there's more weight toward the rear foot? Do you feel like there's more mass shifting toward the forefoot? Is it going toward the inside aspect, the medial portion, the middle of the foot, or is it more to the outside, the lateral aspect? Just get a sense of where you position your body over that foot. Now take your attention over to your left side and do the same thing. Where are your points of contact? And if you struggle to understand where these contact points are, you might find it easier to understand where there is no pressure. So where isn't there any pressure might give you a sense of where you actually are contacting. Is there more weight in the heel, the rear foot, or is there more toward the forefoot? Is it more toward the inside sole or toward the outside sole? Could it be that just the way in which you find your posture and you're managing these segments of your body over your feet are helping to create the shape of your foot as you find it at this moment? So, for those of us that have been told that we have flat feet, it isn't because there's something necessarily wrong with our feet. It could be the result of the strategy in which we are supporting our body weight. So let's see what it's like to support our body weight. If you were to simply turn your torso, turn your hips slightly to the right, what happens to your feet? Do you feel like the arches on your right foot begin to lift and the left foot begins to drop? If you were to rotate the body over to the left, what happens there? Do you feel the left foot's arches begin lifting and the right foot begins dropping? This is what should happen when the body rotates. One arch or one foot begins to supinate and the arches are lifting, while the other foot is pronating and those arches drop. When I go to the left, left foot supinates, right foot pronates. When I go to the right, right foot supinates, left foot arches drop and pronate. This is what should be occurring, but I'm curious, is that's what's actually occurring to you? It doesn't mean you're a bad person if these things aren't occurring. It just means that your subconscious mind is figuring out a way to allow you to rotate, but not necessarily play by the rules. There's some reasons behind that we can't necessarily pick apart now with all of you in the room, but you get a sense that, okay, something's not quite right there. Could it be that I struggle to rotate one area of my body so the feet make up for it? Let's do this. Let's just see what it's like to shift your hips off to the right. So when you shift your hips off to the right, do you feel something changing in your feet? Rolling to the inside of the left, rolling to the outside of the right foot, arches kind of lifting on the right, dropping on the left. When we shift sideways over to the left, what happens to your feet? Are the arches on the left starting to raise up, the right side dropping down? Are these happening? These should be happening, but it's okay if they're not. It just tells us something's not quite right and not playing by the rules. Okay, so you get a sense of what that's like. How about one more thing? We're gonna take a glance down at the little piggies there, at your toes. And what I'd like you to do is you're gonna keep your feet on the floor, but you're gonna try and lift your toes off the ground, keeping the balls of your feet and heels on the floor. Just lift your toes and just take a look at what your toes are doing and then lower them back down. And we'll do this a couple times, lifting up and just holding there. Do you notice that one big toe lifts higher than another big toe? And then lower them back down. What happens to the shape of the arches of your feet when you lift your toes off the ground? Do you notice that the arches begin lifting, or do they not do anything? Now, as the toes lift off the floor, it sends a chain reaction through the rest of the foot, encouraging the arches to lift. But if that's not happening, well, that's great information. That's telling us there's a little disconnect there too. So we're going to try and retrain mechanics into the foot, wake up these different actions. But it's important we know how the foot actually moves. So if you want to, you can go ahead and have a seat once again. We're going to get a sense of how the foot moves. And the thing that is really fascinating is that, well, there's so many things fascinating about the foot, but how it moves one area in one direction and another area in the opposite direction. Like an old clock that had these cog wheels inside, these wheels that had teeth. When one wheel would rotate clockwise, it would send those teeth along with the others on the opposite wheel, causing the other one to go counterclockwise. So if I had these two fingers with a rubber band or muscles attached to them, when the wheels turn this direction, well, those fingers come close together, so those muscles will shorten. And then when I go in the opposite direction, these two fingers move away, so the muscles would lengthen. Now think about my pinky fingers down below. As I go in this direction, the muscles across my index fingers are shortening, but the muscles along my pinky fingers connecting those together are going to lengthen. And the opposite holds true here. As the pinky fingers come toward each other, those muscles would shorten. While my index fingers move apart, those muscles will lengthen. And that's, in simplest terms, how we move, how we walk, how we run. The rib cage rotates in one direction, the pelvis rotates opposite. When we flex our spine, the rib cage bends forward, the pelvis tilts backwards. These oppositional motions occur throughout our body, and they allow certain muscles to lengthen at one moment and then shorten the next. And it's this oppositional action that creates this kind of almost breathing effect with the muscles shortening and lengthening. Consider this though. What happens if they both rotate in the same direction at the same time? Is the distance between my fingers here changing? Nothing's changing here. So if there were muscles between my fingers here, I'm just simply rotating back and forth. There's actually no lengthening and shortening. There's no breathing in the muscle. There's no pumping and circulation. There's no information really being sent up to the brain. That's what can often happen with a flat foot, is that the whole foot collapses inward. It's not that it's overpronated by definition. It's actually just rolling inward, and that tissue is not engaged. It's not understanding what it needs to do. Now, why that foot is rolling in, there could be a myriad of reasons behind it. Most likely, the brain has figured out a way of getting around something that it had to in the past, and it worked then, so it's just going to continue until it's forced to change and figure out a new way to negotiate movements in the body. So with that oppositional motion, we're going to take the front of the foot, basically from right around here, right in front of the heel and where the roof of the foot starts, and we're going to call this the forefoot, right up to like the toes. And the bones in the back, these two big bones called the calcaneus and the talus, that's going to be considered our rear foot. So when the foot drops into the arch, what's happening in the rear foot is it is rolling forward. And what's happening in the forefoot is it's going in the opposite direction. So we're going to get this opposition. So if you were to watch this skeleton, as one rolls forward in the back, we hit the ground here, and the forefoot, even though it isn't rolling off the ground, it has to roll in opposition to the movement of the back foot. So what we have is the tissue underneath being like my pinky fingers, the heel rolling forward, the forefoot having to move away from that rolling, arches dropping, all that tissue loading. That's just in one dimension of space. And what will also happen is the rear foot will roll inward as the heel strikes the ground. It rolls forward and inward. So that inward rolling is going to be coupled with the forefoot doing the opposite direction. So we have this going on now. And if we were to look down the top of our foot, the rear foot is going to internally rotate, and the forefoot is going to just pretty much stay in place, but we have to really create that kind of opposition there. I hope I didn't lose you. What we're really talking about is three-dimensional opposition in the foot. And that's what we're going to look at. Can we create this kind of movement in the foot? And how does it relate further up the chain? It wouldn't be a far reach of imagination to have somebody that had a knee issue change the way in which they walk to avoid the pain in their knee. Whether it's a skier who tore their meniscus on the slopes, or a soccer player who strained their ACL ligaments, or just maybe a gym goer who did a little bit too much work in one area and is really feeling a little bit of joint issue. It's going to change the way in which they strike the ground, which will change the way the movement in the foot is going to behave. And even though the pain of the knee has maybe diminished, they haven't done anything to reset or remind or re-educate the foot and the rest of the body on how it should properly behave after that injury is over. So let's get into feeling our feet. Now, what we're going to try and do, you might need a few little tools here, but I think you have them by your side already if you were wearing socks ahead of time. Because you can roll up those socks and we might be able to use them to help create a little bit better strategy on the feet. What we typically use are these foam wedges here. They're just little things that we'll place underneath different areas of the feet to maybe change the timing pattern of when the foot strikes and what the bones have to do. I guess this is probably a good point to bring up orthotics, because that's kind of what orthotics are trying to do, is change the shape of a foot to more often than not to help create an arch that has been dropped down. There are some drawbacks with it. It's not that orthotics are bad. They could be very helpful, but they're probably not addressing the underlying problem. They're just treating the symptom of why that foot has dropped down. The other thing, if you recall, about the foot is that it's meant to flatten as well as meant to arch. When it flattens, we absorb impact. And when the arch forms, we propel ourselves off the ground. Well, if I have a hard shell that is shoved underneath my foot, that's not going to allow my arch to drop. And therefore, the amount of impact on my body and how I absorb it, well, the impact's going to be the same, but how I absorb it's going to change. And if I'm not able to create the proper joint mechanics in the foot, how can I expect the rest of the chain to behave the way it should? So orthotics will deal with a symptom, but they may cause the symptom to appear somewhere up or down the chain, somewhere down the road. I know that a lot of people wear orthotics, and for good reasons. They've probably helped you out of a lot of problems, but it doesn't mean that what caused your foot to drop in the first place has actually been addressed. You're just kind of dealing with the symptom, I guess you'd say. All right, so let's move on to exploring pronation on your foot. And I think what I'm going to do is drop my camera down to floor level. So with my foot, as you can see, when we looked at the toe, lifting the toe, how that lifts the arch. Now, what also we looked at was how those arches would drop down when weight gets applied to it. And every time I allow that arch to drop, I want to try and encourage the tissue to respond. Now, what I see with my foot is that the arches don't drop down too well. They're dropping a little bit, but what I might want to do is take a sock. In my case, I'm going to take a wedge, and I'm just going to put it underneath the pad of my big toe here so that this contacts the ground a little bit sooner, and that allows me to get a little bit more into this tissue here. And all I'm simply doing is bringing my body forward by bending into my knee. That knee is traveling toward the big toe. And I'm just trying to get a sense of whether or not I can get that foot to feel those 3 points of contact. Remembering the 3 points of contact being the pad underneath the big toe, the pad under the little toe, and my heel. If you find that as you come forward, the heel begins to lift off, you might want to take a sock and put it just underneath the back of the heel, just to give it something to contact. Because what we're trying to do, again, is create good timing with those 3 points of contact. If you found that you didn't get much pressure on the outside of the foot, take a little rolled up sock and put it under the pad of the pinky toe. If you found that most of the pressure was in the middle of the forefoot, under the pad of maybe the second or third toe, we could also take a wedge and put it under the first as well. So now I have 3 points of contact, feeling a little bit sooner what should happen when my foot goes over it. And all I'm going to do is just experience what it's like to allow my foot to glide on top of it and come on back down. But what I didn't point out is which foot might we want to do that with. So we would probably want to focus on the foot that is more dropped down in the arch, one that's more pronating, one that's dropping down. Chances are, because I didn't mention it, you probably favored the foot that you typically want to do things with or demonstrate your more favored foot. So look down at your feet. Which one appears to be dropped down more? That's the one we're going to try and work on. That's it. So as you move back and forth over that foot, where are the points of contact? Is it that your toes are clawing into the ground? Can you allow them to relax? Because by pushing down into the tips of your toes, that actually lifts the front of your foot off the ground and you lose contact with that first and fifth metatarsal head. We're trying to get some good contact points, that tripod effect. After you've done that for, a couple of minutes there, we've been doing it for a couple of minutes, just go ahead and walk around after that. Take a few steps, see what that feels like. Is it different? That's really what I'm interested in knowing. Has it created a different outcome of what's been going on? Check in with your pressure down both feet. A pronated foot, or a foot that is flat, is going to send the body's mass away and toward the opposite side. So if my left foot is flat, it drives the body toward the right. If the right foot is flat, it drives the body toward the left. So where is the pressure in your feet now? Just by getting you to load over that foot and experience those 3 points of contact, did that change anything? Now it's interesting, we're not necessarily going to try and see this miraculous, beautiful, perfectly arched foot instantaneous. But what we're trying to do is create a neuromuscular stimulation, connection between the nerves that connect to the brain and the muscle. Can we give it a new experience? And what does that mean? As you did that, it could be that you started to feel other muscles, like the ones around the front of your thighs and inside of your knee, or maybe the back of the hip, the buttocks. You might have started to feel those suddenly start doing work, and may even found yourself surprised that you were feeling like they were fatiguing, because those muscles actually should turn on when the foot pronates. Now it's interesting, if you want to keep on loading into that, or if you want to switch legs, switch feet, and find out where the pressure is and start to load onto that foot. Where there is space under those 3 points, go ahead and fill it with the sock, or if you have wedges at home, that's great. We're just going to try and fill the space to give that body, give it some contact so the brain understands, oh, hey, I've got something to push off of. So now I can actually reorganize the way in which I use the muscles down there because I have something to leverage against. Yeah, get a sense of that. One question I already see, where do I get the wedges? We do sell them here, but you could probably find them online. If you are, if you need a few, what I can kind of give you the trick of the trade is I go to places like yogadirect.com and buy a long yoga wedge, which is about 18 inches long. And then I just cut them down with a little bandsaw that I have in my garage. And that's how we make them here. But the wedges are wonderful because they can change the timing pattern, not just of the foot, but affect everything further up the chain. All right. Now, we're talking about the pronation. We haven't looked at supination and the reforming of the arch. And some of you might be scratching your head going, well, this doesn't really make sense to me. My feet are already flat, and you're asking me to flatten them further. What's that all about? Well, partly that's because in order to get a muscle to understand how to contract, it actually needs to get load, weight on it while it's lengthening in order to understand that it needs to stop there and start to shorten back up again. The conventional way that people are told to reform their arch is to probably take a newspaper or a towel underneath their toes and start scrunching their toes and trying to reform that arch by contracting and shortening the muscle. The unfortunate thing here is that in human motion, that contracting of a muscle from a neutral position, from a rest position to a shortening position, actually never occurs in human motion. Muscles must first lengthen before they shorten. For instance, if you're sitting there, try to get up out of your chair without leaning forward and loading into the back muscles. Try not to lean forward in any way and stand up. Can you do that? Can you simply go from a neutral position and shorten the muscles to a standing posture? It's not going to happen. You're going to have to force yourself to lean forward some way in order to get up. There needs to be this loading of tissue, lengthening along my backside in order to excite the muscles to cause them to shorten. When the foot hits the floor, it must lengthen before it propels and shortens off the ground. Now, a muscle or the muscles underneath a foot that the arches have dropped down, those muscles are lengthened. So how do we get more length? By being on a flat floor, well, we can put the wedges under it so that the floor occurs sooner, and now I can drop down deeper into it, actually load the tissue as it's lengthening, get the tissue to respond by shortening back up. So it's kind of almost counterintuitive what we're doing here to help create a better shortening response is actually lengthening the muscle out. I'm not talking about stretching. I'm talking about loading the tissue as it lengthens. That creates an excitation, causing a reaction for those muscles to shorten. And as those muscles shorten, that draws the arches back up again. Now there's that way of thinking, but we can also try and just draw the bones into the position they should be in and see if we can get them to respond and to re-supinate, so to speak, but to reform those arches. And the way that we're going to do that is by trying to get all 3 points of the foot on the ground and to keep them on the ground as the arches reform. So we're going to get us up to a standing position again. And we're going to have you stand with feet underneath you, side by side in a kind of comfortable parallel stance. And we're going to be observers of our feet now. As we started at the beginning of the hour, we were looking at when you rotate the body to the right, what occurs at the feet compared to when you rotate left. And if you recall, when you rotate your body to the right, the foot on the right, those arches should begin lifting. The left foot, those arches will most likely be dropping. And when we rotate left, the arches on the left foot begin to lift and the arches on the right foot begin to drop. In order for an arch to occur, we really need to have the points of contact on the floor. The first metatarsal head and the heel. If I create an arch, both points are on the ground. Now I can roll the foot off the ground by lifting that big toe off as I rotate, let's say, to your right. That's actually a great assessment. Let's do this. As you rotate to the right and the arch on that right foot forms on the inside arch, are you able to keep the pad of your big toe on the ground? Or do you lose pressure? For some of us, not only do we lose pressure, but that pad rolls off the ground. Remember those oppositional movements. Well, if the ball of the foot rolls off the ground, then it's just going along for the ride and we don't have any opposition going on. The foot is just rolling off at the ankle. We're not getting that toe to stay down. Just curious, when you do that, are you able to keep the pad of the big toe on the ground or does it roll off? Now, if it rolls off, let's just take one of those socks and put it underneath the pad of the big toe. And as you rotate, for me, I'm going to be working on creating a better arch on my right foot. So I'm going to be working on my right rotation. If your left foot is one where the arches are more dropped down, then you go ahead and you practice what I'm about to say, but going to your left. So as I rotate to my right foot begins to feel the arch lift up. The wedge is under the pad of the ball of my foot right behind my big toe. Can you keep that pressure under the pad of the big toe? And how does that affect the arch? Do you feel how that creates a better arch? So I have two options now. I can load deeper into my tissue by dropping beyond where my foot normally goes to create this stretch shortening effect of the muscle tissue that helped to form the arch. But now I can drive my body in a direction where the arches should form and the muscles are going to respond in kind. And we're going to follow this a little bit up the chain, just like we did with loading into that front foot, allowing that knee to bend and the hip to come over and so on. When I rotate to my right, what happens to that right knee? Does it want to flex and bend, or does it want to extend or straighten? What should be happening as I rotate right, I should be bringing my weight onto my right leg as that knee is extending. So does that happen? Try and do just the opposite. Keep the knee bent, but what happens to the arch? As soon as you straighten your knee out, do you notice how the roof of your foot begins lifting more? Still keeping the pads of your feet on the ground, that first and fifth. And what we can also do here to encourage better arch formation is take another sock and put it on the inside portion of your heel, so that it's kind of parallel with the other wedge or sock. Does that allow you to rotate through the ankle and create a better arch of the foot? So the knee is extending, the hips are rotating on top of the leg, and the pelvis is coming around. And then I just come back to face center. Rotating around again, the pad of the big toe, the ball of the foot staying in contact, the ankle rotating outward, the knee extending, the hip extending, the pelvis rotating onto that leg and coming back around. All right. Take a walk around now and see what that feels like. You've just created pronation mechanics by driving onto that foot and supination mechanics by rotating onto that leg. You've just given your foot a whole bunch of different experiences. Check in with your foot pressure now. If you were standing on those two scales, what would those numbers be like? Are they the same as before, or are they different? It's okay if they're not 50-50. Different is good because we're breaking you out of these patterns that have been reinforced, that have been encouraging a certain foot shape. So if we could do something that gave you a different outcome, then we may actually be able to change how it relates down into the shape of your feet. These are just two basic movements, but they are truly the most basic way in which we move. Pronating and landing on planet Earth, do we properly absorb the impact? The bones move the way they should? Do all three arches drop and support us? And then supination, getting ready to push off the planet, reforming those arches. This is the basic foot mechanics that we're looking for. But what if I struggle to rotate my hips to the right? Might I also struggle in creating arches on my right foot? And vice versa, if I struggled rotating my rib cage, or my pelvis, to the left. We can talk a moment about bunions too, because that's a big part of a lot of people's foot issues. And bunions are typically going to form when the big toe moves off to the side and creates a gapping or space in that joint between the first ray and the toe bones. It's called the metatarsal phalangeal joint. Could it be that that rotation of the toe is trying to make up for a rotation somewhere else in the body? Could it be that it is a typical joint reaction when the foot overpronates, or when it pronates, the toes are meant to go outward? What if that person has a hard time reforming the arches? Might that big toe have a harder time coming back into a more aligned position? So we can actually affect the shape of the foot, not only in the arches, but the alignment of the toes. These are all just strategies that the subconscious brain is trying to use to be the most efficient it can be with everything that it's been dealt with. Oftentimes, though, like I said earlier, is that those strategies, the way in which we negotiate one area of the body with another, they become a more fixed way of moving. And we don't notice it at the time. The pain or the thing that was causing that to occur, whether it's emotional, physical, chemical, or whatever, may have gone away. But the way in which we move to deal with that episode in our life in the past still remains. So we need to kind of recreate and remind, re-educate, and reinforce the proper ways in which we support and which we move. So, two things, without overwhelming you, that we worked on were feeling the foot and how it strikes the ground. When you bring your weight onto it and that knee bends and comes on top of that foot, do you feel the pad of the big toe, the pad of the little toe, and the pad of the heel? Can you create that tripod? Wherever you're losing contact, fill that space with a folded sock. And then just start practicing. Can I get myself onto those 3 points of contact? The other thing we did was standing with our feet underneath us. Can I rotate in one direction and get those arches to form as I rotate toward that? If, again, I lose any contact with those 3 points underneath my foot, fill the space. Give it something to contact against so that we can react on them. There's so many things more to this, but this is just the basic understanding. It could be coming from your hip. It could have been a head injury that changed your head position, that formed your body's way of organizing underneath it, that changed the shape of your foot. It could be that you have an occupation that requires you to be a certain position over time, over years and years, and that has created a different posture, which has fed down into your feet. We all are born as pronated. We learn how to supinate as we become toddlers. So somebody could scratch their head and go, well, what if I skipped a certain phase in my development as a kid, as I was a toddler? That could be a big part of it too. If you didn't learn how to stand, how to walk properly, you've been doing this all your life. It doesn't mean that you can't achieve a new way of moving. You just got to recognize where you are and then have the tools you need to start to change that. So I'm open to questions. If you want to just unmute your microphone, you don't have to use the chat. You just, however you'd like to do it. Or if you want to, you don't want to talk and you want to chat, figure we've got about 10 minutes here before the allotted meetup time. So feel free to throw anything out to me if you'd like.
Thanks, Rocky. This is really, really helpful. I wanted to know about how often we should be doing these exercises.
Ah, beautiful. Okay. One thing is, and it's maybe just semantics, but I prefer to use like movement or experience or something of that nature rather than the word exercise, because as soon as we think of exercise, we think of how many sets and how many reps and how do I quantify this? When in truth, what we're really trying to do is, can I gain better awareness and can I experience what I've been missing? And honestly, the brain is no dummy. As soon as it gets the most efficient way to move, that's going to require less energy overall and more energy for the brain, it's going to latch on to that like you would not believe. So really what we're doing is we're hunting down for the one perfect repetition. It may take hundreds or thousands of repetitions to actually get them all in the right place at the right time, but that's kind of like the joy of doing this. I would say that if you could treat this as kind of like a daily meditation practice or as often as you feel like you can, it might be a nice way to warm up through some type of activity that you have. If you want to do it every morning when you're brushing your teeth and pair it up with something that's a regular habit, that might be a nice way of doing it. But the more opportunity you give the foot to experience how it's meant to move, remembering we've got 26 bones, 33 joints in each foot. 52% of the bones in your body are found in the feet alone. You've got 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, and you've got somewhere around 7,000 or 8,000 nerve endings all in one foot. It's just so nice to give it something. And it's the only part of your body that touches the planet on a regular basis too. This may be just this one nice thing to just feel what it's like. What happens to my knee when I start to bear weight onto it? What happens to my hips? And just bring awareness. You'd be amazed just how much more energy you might find yourself having, how that little kind of achiness up in your neck might start disappearing, all because you got that foot to respond a little bit better. And if you were to go to YouTube and just do a search with my name and exploring pronation, there'll be a video that comes up that guides you through it. And there's another one called exploring supination. Okay. And these two, they're probably about 5 to 8 minutes long. And it's kind of a little bit more information as to what we were just doing. And it goes from joint to joint throughout the body, at least from the hips down. And we don't explore too much of the upper body, but it's a wonderful way of, if you wanted to be guided through this once again, to go through that. So exploring pronation and exploring supination. Just share my own kind of like personal experience with this. I was one of those guys that just always had flat feet. That's what I was told, flat feet. And I've got calluses on the inside portion of my big toes where I push off of, and my toes were getting kind of all gnarled up in a way. And then, and I just thought, okay, well, that's just my feet. That's how it is. And then I started learning about how joints relate to one another and how the body has a relationship to the feet depending on where it is. And I started studying with some wonderful mentors that are in the UK, but they have been studying gait analysis and what the foot actually does. In fact, one of them wrote a book called What the Foot. It's a wonderful book. And we began doing these different movements and finding out where I struggled within my own system, how my right shoulder was restricted and how that was feeding into my hips and how that fed down into my feet. And by getting certain areas to become more integrated and freed up, how that changed the relationship of my body down into my feet and how the arches of my feet actually began to change. Not that I had any problems with my feet. I've never been one to have any inversion sprains, ankle sprains or plantar fasciitis. I've been very blessed in that way that I don't have any symptoms down in my feet. But nonetheless, as I started to explore the areas that I was restricted in one place, it had a positive effect further down the chain. And so that was very intriguing to me. And of course, I started really studying a lot more. And for the past 7 years or so, it's been really what I live, breathe, and eat. So it's been quite fascinating. I guess a little side story is I have this one client. She's about 51-year-old, mother of three, and she was having excruciating hip pain in her left hip, and got to a point where she was having trouble even getting out of bed. Quite young, 51. All things considered, she wasn't able to garden. She wasn't able to do very much at all. In fact, her walking was being so compromised, she eventually went to the doctor. And this was over the course of about a year and a half. This was accumulating. And she went to the doctor. The doctor says, oh, well, yeah, let's do an x-ray. Let's do an MRI. And sure enough, you've got some arthritis here, and you're going to be a good candidate for a hip replacement. I can see that you probably got some labral tears, the cartilage or the tissue between the joints itself, and so on and so forth. And her husband had just come in and saw me a few weeks before that for some low back and knee stuff. And within a very short amount of time, his knee and lower back were feeling great because we started finding the things that were missing in his movements. And then what do you know, all those aches and pains started to go away. So she came in and saw me, and we started to kind of feed back into her timeline, what her history was like. And lo and behold, about 6 years ago, she had broken a bone in her right foot up near the toe, one of those metatarsal bones, the third metatarsal bone. So her third toe from the big toe. You count over big toe being one. So her third toe, and she had to wear a boot for 6 months or so. And then the pain went away. And just like I told earlier, she had changed the way in which she moved. She changed it in such a way that was pretty much unnoticed by most people, and it had shifted her weight over to her left hip to avoid being onto that right foot. And she got onto her right foot by being onto her heel, so she would have to rotate a little bit not to put pressure there. So she was shifting over and rotating, and it was torquing on her pelvis, and her rib cage was trying to get off that right foot, and so on. So her whole body was this kind of subtle contortion of protecting that right foot, even though the pain had been not there for the last 5 years. But for 5 years, she had been behaving that way. And her hip was finally going, I can't support you like this anymore. I can't protect you anymore. I got to let you know there's something going on. So what did we do? We looked at her right foot, got her to bear weight back on it the way it should, got her to pronate properly on that right foot, got her to really understand that she can get weight on there. Well, it was very enlightening to her. She couldn't believe how weak she was in that area. Getting over onto that place, her whole body was practically quivering. But then she walked around, and her left hip was feeling really good. The pain was down to a 1 instead of a 9. And that was just after just getting her onto the front of her foot. And she came back the next week and she said, oh my gosh, I started gardening. And the week after that, she's sitting with her legs folded back behind her and her hips between her heels, like she's in some kind of yogic pose. She's like, this is the most comfortable place I sit. And I haven't been able to sit there for 6 years. And now that's where she goes now. So it's just another kind of example of how everything is connected. And that foot caused a behavior somewhere else. But what about the other way around? What if that hip was causing behavior down there, creating a dropped arch? So I've got tons of videos on my YouTube channel, but you're welcome to check out. There's a whole bunch of quick hacks, but I'm here if anybody's local, or for that matter, online. I do a lot of online kind of consultations and assessments too. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I love these Saturdays. I have no idea what the next year is bringing in terms of subject matter, but I'll put my thinking cap on. We are actually in the midst of relocating the studio that I'm in. We're relocating just a 1 mile down the road on 41st Avenue that I'm a part of here. And in fact, when I shut this off, I'm heading over there to get some work done because in the next couple of weeks before Christmas. So where you'll see me next month is going to be in a different location with a different backdrop. But until then, you guys have a wonderful, happy holiday, and I hope to see you next month.